That we begin this morning with Facebook and the release of thousands of internal documents, giving an unprecedented look behind the scenes at the besieged social media giant.
Now, former employee of Facebook, Frances Haugen, handed the treasure trove over to Congress, the SEC, and a consortium of news outlets, including NBC News. Haugen's attorneys say they show the company misled investors on a range of issues, from its role in the January 6th Capitol riot to how Facebook apps fuel ethnic violence around the world. Joining us now is NBC News reporter Dave Ingram. He's part of our team that has been reviewing these documents. Good morning, Dave. This is a massive leak that touches on so many issues. Give us a sense of what you're learning from reading through these internal papers.
Yes, good morning, Vicki. That's right. This is, I'll give you a sense of the scale of the documents we're talking about here. This is essentially PDF documents going through thousands of pages and years worth of discussion within Facebook on a whole wide range of subjects. And the big takeaway, I think, from this is that the problems that are on Facebook's platform are in some ways much bigger than people outside the company have realized. And what we're getting here is a very deep, intimate, unvarnished look at the debate inside Facebook over a lot of these problems. And those range from everything from what shows up in your newsfeed, the amount of misinformation that is on there, to problems with Facebook trying to attract younger users. And so Facebook engineers look at these problems and they come up with potential solutions, but those solutions aren't always implemented by the company.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk a little bit about what Facebook is saying about this. So in response to this leak of these documents, Facebook's vice president of communications tweeted, they said, a curated selection of millions of documents at Facebook can in no way be used to draw fair conclusions about us. Dave, first of all, I'm just wondering the reaction to that defense there. But also, we know that Facebook is already facing a lot of criticism, especially on Capitol Hill. Even before Frances Haugen's testimony, we've seen Zuckerberg, of course, in front of Senate committees several times before. What could this leak mean for the company? And how might those documents be used by Congress or the SEC, since it's really us being able to see information behind the curtain?
Well, I think what this shows is a lot of employee unrest within Facebook. Frances Haugen is just one of many Facebook employees or former Facebook employees who really question the value of the company. So I think what you're seeing is management at Facebook trying to calm employees, raise morale, and reassure employees there that they are a net positive for the world from the company's perspective. What we're going to watch for is what does the SEC do with these documents? They could open an investigation into whether Facebook has misled investors on a range of these different subjects. The SEC doesn't have to, and they haven't said what they're going to do, but that sort of puts the ball in their court to determine whether they want to move forward with an investigation. Congress has already held one hearing with Frances Haugen, and we can expect that they're going to hold more as they work toward possible legislation for internet privacy and related subjects.
Yeah, the investor component is interesting, and that's where the SEC could get involved. We understand, Dave, some of these documents shed light on Facebook's role in the January 6th insurrection and the rise of domestic extremism. Dave, what about the idea, though, that this is a good thing that Facebook is studying itself, that it is trying to address these problems with its platform? We would expect it to have these discussions. We would hope that it's having these internal debates.
That's right. And that is a point that Mark Zuckerberg himself has made, that he thinks Facebook is being punished for having put forward all these resources into studying the problems on Facebook's platform. And a lot of the documents we're looking at are internal reports on all these problems. So there's one on January 6th that talks about how for weeks leading up to the attack on the Capitol, these groups called Stop the Steal had meteoric rises in popularity on Facebook, and yet the company did not or could not look at them in a holistic way and shut down this movement before it ended up with the deadly attack on the Capitol.
And then let's talk global scale. Facebook and its apps also, of course, have this huge international audience. We saw when there was that Facebook and Instagram meltdown a couple weeks back, unrelated, but unfortunately for them at the same time as Frances Haugen's testimony, that businesses were unable to run, people weren't able to communicate about violence in certain areas, all things that we have come to rely on Facebook or WhatsApp for. What do these documents show about the platform's influence in other countries, especially where there is conflict?
Of course. So most Facebook users are outside the U.S., and these documents show that Facebook's ability to police its platform really varies greatly depending on the country. There are some countries where Facebook just does not have enough people who speak that local language to be able to enforce the company's own rules. It doesn't necessarily have people who can translate and keep hate speech off the platform. So it's trying to add more people with those language capabilities.
Yeah.
All right,
Dave
Ingram, thanks so much for your insight. Keep combing through those documents and come back to us.
Yeah, thank you. Turning now to major progress in the push for COVID vaccines among children. The FDA Advisory Committee is gearing up to review the clinical data from Pfizer for the long-awaited doses among children ages 5 to 11. The committee is set to discuss the data on Tuesday before giving its recommendation to the FDA and the CDC. Now, the review comes just days after the CDC authorized booster shots for all 3 available vaccines in the U.S. According to the briefing data, the benefits of the vaccine for kids under 11 outweigh the risks. The agency also released data from Pfizer showing a 90.7% efficacy rate in preventing symptomatic COVID in children. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us now for the latest. Dr. Patel, good morning. Always great to have you with us. So as we mentioned, this meeting is expected tomorrow. So first, let's take a listen to what Dr. Fauci had to say about the timeline of these vaccines when we could see kids getting them.
If all goes well and we get the regulatory approval and the recommendation from the CDC, it's entirely possible, if not very likely, that vaccines will be available for children from 5 to 11 within the first week or 2 of November.
So, Dr. Patel, what do you think about that timeline? What are the steps here? What can we expect to see moving forward with that committee reviewing this data? Do you see this being a quick process?
Yeah, Savannah, good morning to both of you. And here's the timeline. Tomorrow, as you mentioned, the FDA Advisory Committee, given all the FDA documentation so far that's been released, it seems overwhelmingly positive that this will likely move forward without much controversy for kids 5 to 11 for an emergency authorization, Pfizer for 2 doses. That then moves to the CDC for the Advisory Committee next Monday and Tuesday. Coming out of that, we'll have some sort of recommendations. And Pfizer is ready with these smaller vials to ship and send, and it is likely that that first kind of November 8th timeframe, that Monday after the advisory committees meet, that we could see shots in arms. And I think that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of controversy on this one, Savannah.
Yeah, now the CDC has officially added, this is interesting, those with certain mental health disorders to the list of underlying medical conditions that are at a higher risk for COVID. We know people who are immunocompromised or have these pre-existing conditions are at a higher risk. So explain this one to us. What are these conditions? Does this expand the list also of people who are eligible to receive the booster shot?
That's exactly right. So this expands a list that has been growing, and it's a list that demonstrates that if you have certain chronic conditions, and in this case, we're talking mood disorders such as depression and some serious mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, that those are conditions that qualify you exactly right as a booster. But it's also an alert and an attention that having those conditions alone puts you at a higher risk for death from COVID, above and beyond what we knew before. I think it's important because I think mental illness sometimes gets treated as if it's somehow separate and different than diabetes, heart disease. And by putting this recommendation out there, the CDC blatantly stated what many of us know: mental disorders factor just as much, if not more, than other chronic conditions in who might die from COVID-19. So yes, if you have depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, you would qualify for a booster and should seek out that booster now.
Very interesting stuff and great information for people to have. Dr. Kavita Patel, always great to have you. Thank you for joining us on this Monday.
Well, COVID vaccine mandates across the country are pushing some to get their shots or risk losing their jobs. NBC News correspondent Rahema Ellis spoke to those who made the choice to push back against mandatory vaccinations and paid the price.
I feel secure in my decision. I don't know the long-term effects.
I opted to take the unpaid leave.
Karen Roses is a patient care technician at a New York hospital. Rob Erbst, a married father of 3 boys, spent 17 years at a New York City high school as a phys ed teacher. Raquel Martinez is a pediatric occupational therapist. They all reached the same conclusion about vaccine mandates. Why did you decide to put your livelihood on the line?
I felt like I didn't have much of a choice in the matter, that I was being forced to do something, to put something into my body.
I felt that what they were doing, what they have done, is they've basically held for ransom your health insurance, your benefits, your livelihood, your career in some cases.
A decision pulling at Raquel's heart.
My last task at my job was laminating hearts for my students. And I was able to place them in boxes. I'm getting very emotional because I miss them.
The consequences go beyond emotion.
Financially, can you see yourself continuing?
We have discussed the possibilities of having to sell our house, having to find a new place to live.
Does anything keep you awake at night?
Yeah, fear of the future, not knowing, what's going to happen next. Am I going to be able to get a job, or are we going to be able to keep our home?
Losing a significant portion of your income just like that, where you weren't able to prepare, it's shocking.
But for them, concerns about the vaccine more frightening than losing their jobs.
Are you afraid that being vaccinated will hurt you?
There's too many unknowns for me to be comfortable with it.
I think we need to allow for adequate science and studies to be done.
Rob believes because he already had COVID, he's protected. Research shows the vaccines are overwhelmingly effective and safe, and antibody levels do wane over time after infection.
What do you say when people say it's just selfish not to think of the larger community and just to think of yourself?
Well, it's selfish to think that an individual or a government is going to take away my right to choose what's best for me. Wouldn't that be selfish?
I don't think anybody should impose their beliefs on me for what I choose not to do.
What would you need to hear to change your mind?
I don't think there's anything I need to hear.
If my spirit is telling me this is not right for me, I'm going to listen to my intuition every time.
I'm not saying not ever. I'm just saying not yet, not for me.
Taking a firm stand and now figuring out how to live with it. Rahima Ellis, NBC News, New York.
Time now to take a look at the big stories covered on Meet the Press. Mix and match COVID vaccine boosters, the battle to protect voting rights, and former President Trump's influence looming over the 2022 midterms were talkers this weekend. Here's Chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell with Meet the Press Compressed.
Good morning, Savannah and Vicki. On this week's Meet the Press, clearing up the CDC's guidance for COVID booster shots, plus my exclusive interviews with Senators Angus King and Roy Blunt. We talked about the president's domestic agenda and the filibuster over voting legislation. Here are some of the most important answers from Meet the Press Compressed. Let's talk about the boosters. So the approval for booster shots this week makes a big difference, but there's a lot of confusion, first of all, for Johnson & Johnson recipients. Why is it so important that they consider boosters, and do you recommend the mRNA boosters, getting Moderna or Pfizer for them?
Right. This has been a really important next step in our booster campaign across America because we now have a booster plan for all three of our vaccines. The FDA and the CDC saw a lot of data over the last week. We saw data from the NIH on mix and match that antibody levels for the mRNA vaccines boosting the J&J were really, really high. And we also saw clinical data from J&J that said if you're boosted with J&J, you actually do quite well as well, which is why we've really left it open and said any one of these vaccines can really be used to boost any one of the others.
You were one of the resistors to going against the filibuster, but this week, when for a third time Republicans blocked even any debate on voting rights, you began to change and say that you might consider alterations to the filibuster. What are you willing to consider? Getting rid of it altogether, or having a talking filibuster, which is what they used to do? Where are you now?
I'm not really ready to say let's get rid of it altogether, because I think there are circumstances where it makes sense. So I prefer some alternative to what the present rule is. I'd like to restore the Senate to what it was, where we actually had debates and people had to hold the floor. And so I think some kind of talking filibuster, perhaps a rule that instead of having to have 60 votes to pass something, you'd have to have 41 votes to stop it. So that way, the minority would at least have to show up. So we've got to do something about this, at least when it comes to something as crucial as democracy itself, as voting rights.
I wanted to ask you about some statements that the former President Donald Trump made just this week. On Thursday, he said the insurrection took place on November 3rd, Election Day. January 6th was the protest. Was Election Day an insurrection?
You know, I think the election was what it was. There's a process you go through that determines whether or not the early reports were the right reports, and we went through that process. And I'm of the view that the best thing that President Trump could do to help us win majorities in 2022 is talk about the future, and he can be an important part of this 22 effort. But I think better off to talk about the future than to focus on the past in every election. Every election should be about the future, and I think that's what this next one's going to be about.
Well, this morning, the president's reputation as a deal maker is once again being put to the test. Over the weekend, President Biden played host at his home in Delaware to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin as the trio took part in a strategy meeting for the president's sweeping agenda. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now from New Jersey, where the president will spend part of the day today. Mike, are Democrats any closer to reaching a deal? And what does the president's trip to New Jersey today say about where things stand? What's the message he's sending?
Well, Vicki, what the White House is saying about yesterday's meeting with Senator Manchin was that it was a productive discussion, that they made progress, and that their staffs will stay in touch. I think they copied and pasted that statement from every other one they've said after every previous meeting with Senator Manchin or Senator Sinema at this point. But it does appear that they are close, and that's really what the White House is focused on as he's getting ready to head to Europe later this week. But first, he's coming here to my home state of New Jersey, where he's going to be doing an event with the governor, Phil Murphy, who, by the way, is facing re-election in just over a week. The goal is to promote a new project that's going to be replacing one of the aging bridges like the one behind me here. All about infrastructure. The president's going to be using the groundbreaking for a new portal bridge spanning one of the rivers here, the mighty Hackensack, to talk about what else is in store if Congress can pass both his bipartisan infrastructure plan, but also the larger reconciliation plan as well.
Mike, we know Senator Manchin has been an obstacle for the president's agenda, but Arizona Senator Sinema has also been another Democratic holdout and a regular on SNL these days. Any word from the White House on how things are going with her?
Well, White House officials say that they've been having productive conversations with Senator Sinema throughout this process as well, that they believe that she's been operating in good faith. But obviously, there's a lot of pressure on Senator Sinema from other Democrats who feel they don't know where she stands on some of the key issues at this point. We do know sort of broadly where things stand, though, as it relates to these two senators. Senator Manchin wants the price tag to keep coming down. He has said his red line is about $1.75 trillion, so they're working to get there. Senator Sinema has made things difficult by saying she opposes the way to pay for it, undoing some of those Trump tax cuts as well as lowering the corporate tax rate. But there was progress over the weekend in this respect. We heard from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who said she's been talking to Senator Sinema about a new billionaires tax that the White House seems open to as well. That would be a new tax specifically on those earning more than $1 billion a year. That would be a new revenue stream rather than undoing and redoing some of those other tax rates.
Okay, quickly now, this all happening in the final stretch of the race for governor in Virginia. That's a state the president won by 10 points, but we got a little more than a week until Election Day. This race is still a toss-up. So what's the president saying ahead of Election Day?
Well, we'll see President Biden go to Virginia just across the river from Washington tomorrow to campaign with former governor and, as he hopes, future governor again, McAuliffe. Here's one of my favorite statistics in all of politics, and maybe it's just because I'm from New Jersey, one of these two states. In 15 of the last 16 gubernatorial elections in New Jersey and Virginia, these are the elections, the only ones in the country that happened the year after the presidential election, it's the party that doesn't have the White House that always wins those 15 out of 16 times. And so that's what Democrats are up against. And that's why you heard President Obama over the weekend saying, we can't be tired, we can't be complacent, we got to get out there and vote. It's all about getting out the vote at this point for Democrats.
15 out of 16 times. Wow, those are crazy Vegas odds. Mike Memoli, thank you so much.
Now, we're getting new information this morning on that tragic shooting incident involving Alec Baldwin on a film set in New Mexico. Court papers show a witness saying Baldwin was practicing with the gun when it went off, killing cinematographer Helena Hutchins and injuring the film's director, Joel Souza. Baldwin says he is heartbroken and is fully cooperating with police as the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office investigates the incident. Joining us now to explain what's next in the investigation is NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, good morning. So first, I think the question on everyone's mind is who is responsible? Will anyone face charges for this? Could Alec Baldwin or whoever on a set was responsible for the props or the production company be liable for Helena Hutchins' death?
On a film set, there are overlapping areas of responsibility. Generally, safety is the purview of what's called the first assistant director or first AD. But when you have firearms, it's the armorer as well. And if you have stunts, it's the stunt coordinator. But in a case like this, with overlapping circles of responsibility, you could have several different people. You could have responsibility spread out among several different people. Now, Alec Baldwin, generally an actor who is handed a gun, should expect that the other people on the crew are doing their job and handing him a cold gun. But keep in mind also that Alec Baldwin was the producer, and producers can have varying degrees of involvement. If, as these reports are coming out, there was a lot of prior notice of these alleged discharges of firearms, and if Alec Baldwin was a hands-on producer and not just an actor paying some money into this production, then he may have some responsibility as well. Investigators are going to look at the extent of his involvement and supervision of this set and the use of the firearm. Remember, with a single action revolver like this, they have the potential, because the firing pin rests on the primer, it may not have even been a trigger pull. It could even be a bump or something like that. They're not particularly safe, or there are modern guns that are safe.
Right, absolutely. That's a really good point about Alec Baldwin being the producer. And also you referenced some of these other things that we've heard going on, that the gun had gone off a few times, things like that. And I think in the first place, there's a lot of confusion about how a loaded gun could even end up in an actor's hands. Why are there even live rounds and not just blanks even on the set available? What more do we know about the events leading up to the shooting? What are investigators looking at right now? You mentioned the issues with the gun prior. Tell us what we know that have come up as these issues since this has happened.
Yeah, since this has happened, I've been guilty of this. I've called it a prop gun. I'm not entirely sure that that's the right term, because after all, it's a gun that was able to fire a projectile. That is not exactly a prop gun. You may have had an issue with blanks or dummy rounds or a mix-up. If these reports are true that they were actually shooting live ammunition on set, that sounds like a massive no-no. Industry experts will tell you that live ammunition should not be anywhere near a set. So those are all going to be looked at, and the nature of the prior discharges, if they happened, why they happened, and if they were related. But I mean, and once that news emerges that this kind of thing may have been going on beforehand, that's a real problem for the studio, for the producers, for all the people supervising this production, because it's what we call in the law prior notice, either actual or constructive.
And now also there's something else going on here. Just hours before the incident, several members of the crew of this film called Rust walked off the set because of safety concerns. I mean, I don't know if that qualifies in terms of what you just said. I know it's not prior knowledge of the actual weapon there, but I mean, safety concerns on the set, and then this happens just hours later. This also comes just after a major film union nearly went on strike for similar reasons. First, let's listen to what one union member said about that.
We're trying to get better work environments, and because of the conditions that we work under right now, we work very long hours, we're very tired, and we make mistakes, like putting the wrong gun on a prop table.
So now, just to clarify, that man was not working on the Rust set, but you obviously hear him referencing these circumstances as somebody who understands the situation, at least to an extent. Danny, do you think film sets are going to have to make any big changes after this?
Oh, yes. And in addition, with the advent of things like CGI, there's a very strong argument to be made that do you even really need live ammunition or even a gun that could potentially fire a projectile anywhere near a set at all? Do you even, if you can CGI in the explosion that appears in a gun when you fire it, if there are safer ways to do this, have we come to a point where we no longer need live ammunition or even blanks anywhere near a set? So I expect that plus the idea that folks now with a laptop have the technology available to them to CGI in a lot of what they need. you may see some major regulatory changes or industry self-regulation following this tragic accident.
All right, Danny Savalos, lots to follow here. Thank you so much. Now, a bomb cyclone and an atmospheric river drenched parts of the West Coast on Sunday, bringing more than half a foot of rain to parts of the Bay Area, along with high winds and flash floods.
Our very own Bill Cairns told us it was coming all weekend, Bill. I saw a ton of videos on social media from my friends on the West Coast showing exactly what you predicted. Good morning.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, feast or famine, right? They went through this prolonged drought. Like Sacramento went 200 days with no rain, and then yesterday they had their rainiest day ever recorded. And their records go back to the late 1800s. So that's like 51,000 days. So you can see we have one of these big, huge storms, these little cinnamon buns like we talked about. I mean, it's swirling off the coastline to the northwest. And that was one of the strongest storms we've ever seen. We also have pictures that are coming in from areas like Missouri. We had a tornado outbreak last night. This is some of the video from California of the wind and the rain problems. There's been some landslides. I know Highway 70 is closed because of a rock slide. There's just a lot of water in a short period of time. The one thing that we didn't hear of is any really bad debris flows from the burn scars from any of those fires. So that's one piece of good news. They were very worried about like the Dixie Fire area. We didn't see that. So let's get to the forecast, show you what's going to happen now. So you can still see the huge storm. It's still raining very hard south of San Francisco. It looks like San Francisco and Sacramento are getting a break. We still have some gusty winds. We still have some heavy snow in the highest of elevations. So that's going to continue today from Monterey up to Yosemite. And as the storm begins to slowly weaken, that rain will shift southwards. Doesn't look like Los Angeles is going to get much rain out of this at all, just some gusty winds. So we still have those flash flood watches for the highest of elevations, and we do still have some flash flood warnings out there. So again, a slow morning drive for sure. And the winds, about 18 million people still under wind advisories and wind alerts. So this storm will weaken from here on out and its impacts. So there's the other story today, flash flooding possible and also heavy rain in the mid-Atlantic. A Tuesday nor'easter, we'll talk about more next hour, and then heavy rain in the middle of the country Wednesday, and for Halloween weekend that's coming towards the northeast Friday into Saturday. So more on that later in the week. But stay tuned for next hour. We have a huge storm that's going to develop in New England tomorrow. I'll say what that's going to mean coming up.
All right, that's quite the tease. See you in a little bit. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.